Today's shiur begins 13 lines from the bottom of Daf Lamed Hey, a little more than halfway down. We have found ourselves continually in the last few dapim, each time in the middle of a sugya, very simply because we're now at the final stage of the sugya that began on Daf Lamed Aleph Omid Beis, where the Gemara had raised a stira between the Mishnah in Maseches Makis and our Mishnah here in Kesubos. In our recent discussion, at the end of our previous shiur, we were dealing with the issue of payment made or not, the necessity of making a payment of financial restitution in the case of an offense that was punishable also by malchus. We saw in our last discussion under Rovin's heading, we have a diamond number 2, a few lines up from where we're beginning today, where Rovin had mentioned that the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish would be in a case where someone unintentionally violated an act or a sinful act that would have generated malchus had there been a warning, but there was no warning. And at the same time, there is a financial loss that was caused. Is there a need for making compensation, for paying the lost party his loss, to refund him, to compensate him for the loss? We saw Rabbi Yochanan said yes, in the case of chayve misos based in that was b'shogeg, there we say there is no compensation necessary, but in chayve malchios shogeg there is compensation that must be made, and Reish Lakish had mentioned no, he is exempt. And this is based on the last comment that was made, that beferish ribsa torah chayve malchis ke chayve mis, just like in the case of chayve mises, capital type offenses that happen, that take place, that are violated unwittingly, but at the same time there was a financial loss, yet there is exemption in paying that financial loss. So too in chayve malchios, those kind of sins that warrant lashing, if at the same time there was a financial loss that was sustained, no compensation need be made. The Gemara asks, Heichon ribsa Torah? You just said that beferish ribsa Torah, the Torah was marbeh, that through the Torah we learned chayve malchus are treated the same way as chayve krisis, both would be exempt from payment, from the need for making restitution. So where is that found in the Torah? We're going to have Abaye's approach and then Rava's approach. Omar Abaye, Asya, Rasha. Abaye says there is a gzeira shava, using the word Rasha as the common word, the word comparison between the topic of chayve misos based in, and Rashi quotes the pasuk Ashehu Rasha Lomus, and by chayve malchus you find the pasuk says V'im v'hoya in bin hakos harasha. So just like in chayve misos there is exemption from financial restitution, so too in the case of chayve malchios. And bear in mind, we're talking about situations where the actual misa or the actual malchus are not going to be meted out. But since in potential, when they would, if they were to have been meted out, there would be exemption. So too, even when they're not actually meted out. We continue in the Gemara. Rava Omar Asya Maka. Malchus is compared to misos based in. This is not a gzeira shava though. Abaye suggested a gzeira shava. Rava is using a hekish. Hekish is a comparison. Omar le Rav Papa the Rava. Hey Maka. When you say there's a hekish Maka, what are you referring to scripturally? Ilema umake behemo yishalmeno make odom yumas. That can't be the source though. Hi bekatluksiv. That pasuk is talking about a capital offense. Make Odom Yumos, a person who kills his friend, so he must be put to death. That's not a case of Malkois. We're looking for a case of Malkois, where we will be led to the conclusion that there will be exemption for making financial restitution. Elo, hi Maka, rather the following. Make nefesh behema yishalmena, nefesh tachas nefesh, v'somech lei, and following the pasuk dealing with behema inflicted loss that you have to pay. It also says, next to it says, V'ish ki teimum ba miso, kasher also ken yaselo. That has to do with creating an injury in a person, which carries with it the potential for malkos. And we ask, though, a question: if you see that that make odom is compared to make behema, and just like make behema, there's always payment. So too in the case of so likewise in an unqualified fashion, where there's a chiyuv malchus, there will always be exemption from payment, and that's supposedly the hekish. The Gemara asks for high lav makehi, but you said that we were working with the word maka, and I don't see the word maka here. The Gemara answers, Anon hako kamri. We're not dealing with an actual word comparison. We're dealing with a concept of inflicting impact. The Gemara asks, the pasuk that you just cited of Ish ki teimum ba miso is in fact talking about a case of inflicting injury in a fellow Jew. That is, if anything, that's a case. That's a type of offense where you do have to make financial restitution, and we're looking for just the opposite. We're looking for some Torah reference that in a chiyuv malchus there will be exemption for financial restitution. So how in the world can you cite a source where it's in fact the opposite? Gemara responds, Im eino inyan la'akosh yesh bo shava pruta. The pasuk that we cited of Ish ki teimum ba miso, if it's not relevant to a case of injury that is valued at a minimum of a pruta, which is the smallest amount of currency, and in fact there is a need for financial restitution, teneo inyan la'akosh she'ein bo shava pruta. So use this pasuk to refer to a case where the injury does not have the value of even a pruta. Now, when the Gemara mentioned that I don't need the ish ki teimum ba miso to tell me about hakosh yesh bo shava pruta, because that situation is learned from another source, and Rashi quotes the other source. So this pasuk of ish ki teimum ba miso kasher also ken yaselo is used to refer to a case of hakah, hitting a friend, attacking a friend, but the damage inflicted was less than a shava pruta, so there's no financial issue. The Gemara asks, so we're at the top of Omid Bey, self lav bar tashluminhu. That's not a good example for what we're looking for. We're looking for a case where there is a chiyuv malchus, and there's also a chiyuv tashlumin, and we want to show that in such a case, since there's a chiyuv malchus, the tashlumin that you thought you would have made, you don't make. You don't pay. But if you're dealing with a case where there's no momon to begin with, it then leaves me room to think that if there would be momon, I would have to pay. The Gemara responds, Lo, tzricha. The case that we just mentioned with the hitting of the friend is needed. The bahadi de machia, that as he was hitting the friend with the hakosh she'ein bo shava pruta, kosh shiroin delay, also tore his clothing. So for the tearing of the clothing, that has value, and the pasuk is telling me that he will get only malkos because of hitting the friend, and he's exempt from paying for the tearing. No difference whether there was a warning or whether there was no warning. He is exempt from paying because of the hekish to the case of makeh behema, where there is no exception made, and there he always has to pay. So the hekish is this concept of, we're comparing them on the grounds that there is no qualification. In the case of behema, you're always paying. In the case of a chiyuv malchus, you're never going to pay. The Gemara continues. Omar lei Rav Chia leRava. Rav Chia presents a question to Rava. Uletana de Bechizkiya. The Omar. Now here the Gemara is quoting from making reference to the Tana Bechizkiya. This was a Tanaic source that we saw on the fifth line from the top of Omid Aleph, of Lamed Hamid Aleph. So according to that source, the Omar Makeh Odam Umakeh Behema, and in that source we concluded that just like by Makeh Behema there's an unqualified obligation of making restitution for the loss of the animal, so too there is an unqualified exemption when it comes to financial restitution in the case of the murder, the killing of a person. So the Gemara is asking here, or as Reb Chia asks Rava, Mimai de bechol ksiv v'leka leflugi. Who says that the psukim that speak about makeh odom and makeh behema are referring to an incident that takes place during a weekday? And during a weekday when an animal is hit, so then there's no distinction made whether it was with intention or without intention. The weekday is characterized as a day where there's no room for making any distinctions. We'll appreciate this in a moment, because we're going to contrast this in asking the question, Dilma Demas, maybe B'Shabbos Ksiv, maybe the source is talking about an offense that is transpires on Shabbos. The behema gufa equal leflugi, that within the realm of behema itself there is room for making distinctions. Now, just to go over this point, because it's a little bit abstract. When we were learning the Tana de Bechizkiya, we were concluding that chayve misas based in, even if it's shogeg, will be exempt from any need for making financial restitution. In other words, by chayve misos, an unqualified exemption. And this was because we were learning from the case of makeh behema, where likewise unqualified obligation. That's fine and good if you're assuming that the psukim referred to by Tana Bechizkiya are psukim dealing with the injury inflicted or the killing of taking place on a weekday. However, if the makeh behema, the case of let's say killing the animal, was on Shabbos, then for a Shabbos violation, we would make a distinction between mazid, something intentional, versus something shogeg. If it's intentional, so you kill an animal intentionally on Shabbos, so that's a Shabbos violation with a capital punishment associated with it. If it's unintentional, so there's no capital punishment associated with it. But in order to come to the conclusion that the chayve misos based in are always exempt, you'd have to have a case by the animal that you're always, in an unqualified fashion, always chayev. But if you say that the pasuk is talking about an event that took place on Shabbos, I lose this element of unqualified obligation when it comes to makeh behema on Shabbos. Because if the makeh behema took place on Shabbos with intention, then there wouldn't be any financial obligation, because he's chayav misas based in. And if it's done unintentionally, so then there's no misas based in. The Gemara answers, Lo salka daitach. You cannot think There is no room for thinking that the source is dealing with an event that took place on Shabbos and done b'shogeg. In order for us to talk about the makeh behema as being chayev in payment, you'd have to have set it up Shabbos, but done unintentionally. But it can't be, dichtiv, because the pasuk says, "Umakeh behema yishalmena, umakeh odom yumas." Hechidomi. What are the circumstances? Idolo asru bei makeh odom amayumos. If it's a case where there was no warning, so why would the pasuk say that one who kills a man, he has to die? There was no warning beforehand, and as we've said so many times in our recent shiurim, that without a warning, court-administered punishments cannot be meted out. Elo pshita de asru bei. Well, it has to be then a case where a warning was issued. V'i b'Shabbos, if you're talking about a Shabbos, then the pasuk said makeh behema yishalmena, that for killing an animal with intention because of the prior warning, you would pay? Of course not. You don't pay. That the person is subject to court execution, and we have the principle of komle b'derabbamin. He gets the more severe punishment and would not have to pay. Yet the pasuk speaks about him having to pay. Elolav b'chol. Rather, the pasuk has to be talking about a case of a weekday killing of the animal. And in a weekday killing of the animal, so there's no Shabbos violation involved, so there's no capital element by the animal loss. It's only financial loss. And as we said, since by animal it's unqualified obligation, likewise by man, killing of man, unqualified exemption by way of financial restitution. A new marking appears. The diamond appears, and on the side under the mivneh heading, these are shnei or shtei she'elos shel miuatana. There are two questions that involve trying to find out who is the author of, and we'll see whatever. We also have a nosei mivneh heading where you see a crown shape appearing. Biru shitas rabba. We're going to be looking into Rabba's opinion, B'yishuv stiras mishnosenu v'hademakis. And you see that he's listed as number 4. It's been a long haul, but here we are at the last of the 4 approaches, we'll say, in how to resolve the seeming contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Makis. And what leads me to present the Gemara this way is based on the Rashi in Dibur HaMaschil, Masnisin Kaman Moikim. And that Rashi you can see is about halfway down the narrow lines, where Rashi says, Lishnuye Rumio de Raminon Allah. The question is presented that according to Rabbah, our Mishnah is in accordance with whom? And this is in an attempt to answer the contradiction that was raised between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Maseches Makis. And as we read the Rashi that said, "L'shnui rumi d'Rabbinan Allah the Elohein Alokin, the Kaimalon the Ein Loiku Mishalim," and we're working with an assumption that if you see that there's Malchus, there is no payment. So in our Mishnah, we saw the same type of offenses listed, and there was payment. That would have been the contradiction. So now we turn to the Gemara text itself. Maybe before we do that, let's read that. We didn't read the nosei mivneh heading in full. The crown shape appears, and we indicate biru shitas rabba bishu siris mishnoseinu v'hadamakis simanu es rabba hochi. We presented Rabba with the crown shape kedei lekasher oisu leula Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, to connect him to the 3 names we just mentioned. Dekvar hityachasu l'shei lazu. They, Ula, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, already dealt with this issue of who is the author of our Mishnah in order to avoid the contradiction between this Mishnah in Kesubos and the Mishnah in Maseches Makis. So now the Gemara. Omar lei Rav Papa la Abaye. Rav Papa asks Abaye, LeRabba the Omar, according to Rabba, that said within the Shita of Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabba had made a comment explaining Shitas Rabbi Meir, and this was in light of the source that we saw, where a person stole and slaughtered an animal on Shabbos. And Rabba said the same person that stole the animal, he also slaughtered it on Shabbos, and Rabbi Meir said that there would be payment. Even though you're dealing with a capital offense, there nevertheless is payment made. And this was based on, and this was the point at which Rabba said as follows. Chidushu, we're reading in the Gemara, Chidushu shechidsha torah b'knas. According to Rabbi Meir, there's a novel point that concerning the realm of knas type payments. Knas payments are Torah imposed fines, which is a payment that is regardless of the actual market financial loss aspect. It's an additional level type, or additional type payment, if you will, or it's a different kind of payment called knas that doesn't reflect the loss per se. The afalgav the miktal, even though the person in incurring that financial obligation, he's also guilty of a capital offense, mishalim, he still has to pay the money. So according to Rabba, who said that about Shitas Rebbe Meir, Masnisin Keman Moikim Law, our Mishnah at the beginning of the of our parak that mentions the payment of knas for Boal Alachoso, for example, one who a brother who rapes his sister. Our Mishnah will be set up according to whom? Rebbe Meir. If you're going to say that our Mishnah is authored by Rebbe Meir, and that would help us to understand why our Mishnah is saying that there is a knas payment made, Kashyabito, we run into a problem because the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav says that a father who rapes his daughter does not pay. But if our Mishnah was according to Rebbe Meir, you're talking about a knas payment, so Afagav the Mikdal, Mishalem, he should have to pay. Yet the Mishnah on Lamed Vav, which is a continuation of our Mishnah, says he doesn't have to pay. So it can't be according to Rebbe Meir. Kerebi Nechunya ben Akona. If you want to say that our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Nechunya, just to review, we've learned this already, but he said that Yom Kippur is to be viewed like Shabbos regarding payment. Namely, just like on Shabbos, for a Shabbos violation, a person who violates Shabbos and simultaneously causes a financial loss, he does not offer restitution. Likewise, with regard to Yom Kippur, which is Chayav Kores, there is a person who does an act involving Kores and at the same time creates a financial obligation. He does not compensate for that. Kashya Choso. Then what would we do with the case of Achoso, brother rapes sister? That is like Yom Kippur in the sense that it's a Kores level violation, and according to our Mishnah, he does have to pay. Rabbi Nechunya wouldn't say that he has to pay. Rabbi Yitzchak, if you would say that our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Yitzchak, we haven't seen him here, but he appears in Maseches Makis, and we're to understand his shita as holding that if a person is going to get malchus, he doesn't pay. So, Kashi Mamzeres, the Mishnah spoke about raping a Mamzeres. A Mamzeres is a type of offense that generates malchus. Now, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, if it generates malchus, there would be no payment. And yet, according to our Mishnah, there is payment. So what is Rabba going to do? How is he going to set up our Mishnah? Hanicha, things could work out for Rabba, Sovar law Rabbi Yochanan, if Rabba holds like Rabbi Yochanan, Hu nami metaritz lo Rabbi Yochanan, he could resolve our Mishnah like Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what did Rabbi Yochanan, how did he resolve, how did he explain our Mishnah? Our Mishnah was talking about a case where there was no malchus, and therefore there's room for tashlum. So that even though, I'm assuming now we're continuing with the Rabbi Yitzchak approach, and the Rabbi Yitzchak approach said that if you give malchus, so there's not going to be any payment. But if there was no hasra, if there was no warning ahead of time, according to Rabbi Yochanan's approach, when you're dealing with chiyuvei malchus shoygigin, there is payment made. So then he will explain. That means Rabbah can explain our Mishnah like Rabbi Yochanan, namely that there was no hasra. That was Rabbi Yochanan's approach way back. Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis. We saw Rabbi Yochanan's approach on the 5th line from the top there. Rabbi Yochanan appeared, and he mentioned that our Mishnah was Shalo Hisrubo. So Rabbo can say the same thing, that our Mishnah would be in accordance with Rabbi Yitzchak, and the case of our Mishnah is that there was no warning. Eloi Sovar Reish Lakish. If Rabbo holds like Reish Lakish, now Reish Lakish's approach was that in Chiyuvei Malchus, even if there's no hasra, he spoke about Chiyuvei Malchus Shoygigin. There was no hasra for the Malchus worthy offense. For example, Bo al Mamzeres. What would Reish Lakish say? Reish Lakish says they're dealing with a Chiyuvei Malchus are always exempt from payment. Then Heichi Mitaretz law. If Rabbah holds like Reish Lakish that Chiyuvei Malchus, even where there's no hasra, is exempt from payment, then how is he going to explain our Mishnah, which features a Chiyuvei Malchus and there is payment? Al Korchach Rabbi Yochanan Srilu. Therefore, you have to say that Rabbah holds like Rabbi Yochanan that when it comes to Chiyuvei Malchus Shoygigin, there is payment, and therefore, in our Mishnah there was no hasra, and therefore there is payment. Omerle Rav Matana Labaye L'Reish Lakish Di Omar. According to Reish Lakish, who said, according to the Rabbanan, Beferish Ribso Torah Chayvei Malchus Chayvei Mises, that a Malchus type offense, a person who violates a lav in the Torah that also has with it a financial loss, that is treated the way a person who commits a capital offense with which includes a financial loss, no restitution. Mantana de polig olei de Rebbe Nechunyo ben Akona. Who is the Tana that would disagree with Rabbi Nechunyo ben Hakona? Rabbi Nechunyo ben Hakona is the one that said that for Chayvei Krisus, there's always going to be exemption from payment. According to Reish Lakish, that is the opinion of the Rabbanon as well, that just like Chayvei Misos Beis Din are exempt from payment, Chayvei Malchus are exempt from payment, that approach would seem would not enable the Rabbanon to be the authors that argue with argue with Rabbi Nechunyo ben Akona. But we know that there are Tanoim that argue with Rabbi Nechunyo ben Akona. So who could that be? Answer: Rabbi Meir. It could be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, we have seen to say that though there's no mace u'mishalem, just to refine that last point, we say Rabbi Meir, that even though Rabbi Meir is on record as having said as there's ein mesu mishalem, that explains the Mishnah on Lamed Vov. Nevertheless, loke u'mishalem could be, and that explains why there's malchus for the bo al achoso and also bo al hamamzeres. Alternatively, Rabbi Yitzchak. According to Reish Lakish, our Mishnah could be set. The Mishnah, that is, could be set up like Reb Yitzchak. But truth be told, the Rashi explains it with some length. The reference to Reb Yitzchak is a reference to Reb Yitzchak as being the author of the opinion that's cholek on Rabbi Yochanan ben Akana, which appears in Masechah Shavuos. And in Masechah Shavuos, mention was made of someone who burns the grains of his friend on Yom Kippur, where the Tanakama says chayav and Rabbi Yochanan ben Akana says potter. So regarding chiyuv kores and the need for making restitution, that's something that even Reb Yitzchak would agree with. He could be the Tana that's cholek on Rabbi Yochanan ben Akana. But as far as our Mishnah is concerned, that speaks about payment not only for chiyuve kores, but for chiyuve malkos as well, that can be set up only like Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Yitzchak will tell you that there's no that there is no possibility of speaking about the mamzeres case and also the need for paying, because we're working within Shitas Reish Lakish that said that all cases of chiyuve malkos will be exempt from paying. Reb Yitzchak holding that if there's malchus, there's no payment, and yet in our Mishnah we saw that for the Baal Mamzeres, which is a malchus-oriented offense, there is payment. So our Mishnah wouldn't be authored by Reb Yitzchak, but it could be authored by Rabbi Meir. As far as that last discussion, Rashi, as I said, elaborates on that quite a bit. We continue with the Gemara, but before we continue with the text, we glance at the side, we see a topic heading, Rishima Shel Noshim. We have a list of women, She'ein Lohen Knas Upitui. There's no fine, 50 shekel kesef for either their rape or their seduction. Another point that will be elaborated on in this piece of Gemara is Birur ma mashmo shel arayas u'shnias arayas. What is the meaning of the expressions arayas and shnias arayas that appear in the upcoming source she'ein lahem knas u'pitu? What do those expressions mean? So now we go to the Gemara. Tonu Rabbanon arayas u'shnias arayas ein lohen lo knas v'lo pitui. One who has either rapes or seduces these categories of women, arayas and shnias arayas, there will be no knas payment and no pitui payment. That's the 50 shekel kesef that would be paid to the father of these girls. And the source continues, Hamema'enes ein lo knas v'lo pitui. Mema'enes is a girl that was married rabbinically by either her mother or brother. If a girl is mima'enes, that means she can walk out of her marriage without the need for a divorce. This is all part of a rabbinic arrangement for girls whose fathers are out of the picture. Usually we speak about their fathers having died. So there is a provision for her to be married off rabbinically by her mother or her brother. And we're speaking about, of course, a minor, a ketana. So when she leaves her husband, she's called mima'enes. She expresses her desire to depart from him. Now, a girl like that, if she is raped, she will not generate ein lo knas v'lo pitui. The payments of knas and pitui are made only for a basula, a virgin girl, and we're assuming here that she's no longer a virgin. She had been married, albeit rabbinically, to this man. Number 3, ailinus ein lo knas v'lo pitui. An ailinus is a woman that never matures to in a normal, healthy fashion. She never brings forth signs of what called na'arus. She is incapable of procreation, and therefore we say regarding her, since she doesn't really enter the stage of na'arus, she doesn't bring forth the signs, the physiological signs of development that would lead us to view her as a nara, so there is no knas and pitui. As we said, the knas and pitui payments are made for the violation of a na'ara. And number 4, vayotzis mishum shemra ein lo knas v'lo pitui. The Rashi explains toward the bottom, vayotzis mishum shemra kosaka daitoch. The thinking right now is shalom motzel l'bayla b'sulim, where the husband discovers that she's no longer a virgin. L'kaman parach baskil. Later the Gemara asks, what do you mean yotzis mishum shemra? A woman who leaves her husband because of shemra is a woman that has been charged with having been unfaithful to her husband, and as a result of that she's chayav skila. So it's obvious that there's no knas or pitui. So that has to be clarified later. Maya rayas umay shnius la rayas. Here we were trying to understand what do those phrases mean. This question continues to the second line from the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. In lemo arayas equals arayas mamish, which means the actual women forbidden to someone from the Torah. And shnios equals midivrei sofrim. Shnios are women that are rabbinically prohibited for one to marry. For example, one's mother's mother or one's father's mother. Those are women, we call, of course, grandmother. Those women are prohibited on a rabbinic level. On a Torah level, they're not prohibited. Kevon dimidoraisa chazile, since on a Torah level they are fit, the shnios. We just mentioned 2 examples, but there are many other examples of shnios. So, since on a Torah level, there's a kind of woman that's fit for you to marry, amai ein lohen knas, what would be the basis of saying that there is no knas? Maybe we should add that the case of knas, in either oynes or pitui, the Torah makes a provision that the offender is expected to marry those women. So if you can't come to marriage, so I understand then the women don't figure in the parsha of the knas. But the shnios, if you interpret that as being divrei sofrim, rabbinically prohibited, but on a Torah level allowed to marry them, why should there be no knas? Elo arayas in this context equals chayve misus based in, and shnios equals chayve krisus. Arayas would mean women who relationship with whom would lead to court execution. Shnios would be women intimacy with whom would lead to a kores penalty. Avol chayve lavin. However, women that you would be prohibited to only on a negative command level, not kores and not misas bezdin, yesh lohen knas. There would be a knas payment. If women were raped or seduced, you would have to pay knas. You'd have to pay the 50 shekel, the 50 pieces of silver. Umoni, and this Tanaic source would then be in accordance with whom? Shimon HaTimni he. Shimon HaTimni, this is a shita that we saw quite a few dapim ago. He says that when the pasuk says v'lo tiel isha in the parsha of knas, in the parsha of rape, it says, and unto him she shall be as a wife. A woman who is usher to you on a level of chiyuvei lav, a negative command. We know, however, according to Shimon HaTimni, the marriage takes hold. It's an isha sheyesh bo havaya. V'lo tihel isha. Tia means that she can be, verb form of to be. She can be a wife, meaning the marriage institution, the marital status takes hold. Ika Diamri, another approach to this is, and again we're trying to figure who's the author of this source. So first we have to define what arayas and shnias are. Iko diami arayas equals chayve mises bezdin v'chayve krisus. All of those kind of forbidden relations are included under the term arayas. Shnias equals chayve lavin, women that are prohibited on a negative command basis. And the source is then telling me that all of these women, if they are raped, there would be no knas, whether it's a woman that generates a chiyuv misas bezdin, or a woman intimacy with whom generates kores, or a woman intimacy with whom is considered a mere negative command. In all cases, no knas, money. So who would the author of that be? Rabbi Shimon ben Menasyehi. This would be in accordance with Shimon ben Menasye, who said the only time you pay knas is a woman that's fit to continue living with. But a woman, even if the marital status takes hold, but you're expected to part from her, to get rid of her, for example, chiyuvei lavin, there would be no knas. So if you say that shnias means chiyuvei lavin, and the source is telling me no knas, that would be in accordance with Rabbi Shimon ben Menasye.